Okay. Call this meeting to order. Join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Look at you did it.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Smith. Mr. Shiflett. Mrs. Mulvena.
Here.
Ms. Clark Pearson.
Here.
Mr. Quina. Here. Mrs. DeFort.
Here.
President McKinnon.
Here. This time I will entertain a motion for the approval of agenda items.
I move the Grand Ledge Public Schools Board of Education approve the February 25th, 2019 agenda items as presented.
Support. Oh, go ahead, take it.
Okay. That was supported by Ms. Mulvena, correct?
Ben.
Ben, okay. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, the same. Okay, motion passes 6-0. All right. I will, at this time, entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda items.
I move the Grand Ledge Public Schools Board of Education approve the February 25th, 2019 consent agenda items as presented.
Support. I would like to make a mention, though. I'm noting to the minutes from January 14th that we did not, in our organizational meeting, the minutes don't show that we nominated or elected Jay Bennett to be our representative at the Eaton RESA. But now pardon me? As of June, I thought, though. Oh, we didn't have to? Okay. My mistake then. Thanks.
Okay. Any further discussion? Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, the same. Motion passes 6-0. This takes us to reports. Start with the Capital Connections report. With, is that Mrs. Oh,
Mr. Smith.
Mr. Smith, sorry, changing in the guard.
So, this would be my first one of these. Not, if there's a different way everyone prefers this go, just let me know.
Being that it just lit up, now it is. That goes right along with what I was saying, how my first one of these. I planned that. So I don't know if there's a particular format for how these have gone in the past. It's
You just report that we're going to get more money from the state and everything's going to be just fine.
That's good. I'm hopeful we'll get more money from the state. Everything's going to be just fine.
Perfect.
If in the future, would this be a venue for, if you notice anything happening in the legislature or, okay, so I did catch one today. Bill's 4221 and its counterpart is 122. Has the purpose of keeping the evaluations for teachers as well as the administration and the portion that's based on student growth at 25%, as opposed to, I believe it's set, actually the bills would increase this to 40%, as based on the students' growth, which then goes on to discuss that 50% of student growth is tied to their M-STEP progress. So I don't, not speaking on that with any type of position, just passing that along, that I did see that has been proposed or introduced. So that's out there.
I guess I'll ask this question of Dr. Metcalf if he knows any more about this. I read this in the paper that Governor Whitmer had mentioned proposing
forgiving the 5 days of that one kind of crazy week with weather. And I don't know where it went from there, if it gained any traction in the Senate or what, but have you heard anything more on that?
There's been several bills proposed, anywhere from a couple days to an entire week. And at this point, I haven't heard that anything has traction. But I think part of the discussion has been, let's wait till we get to
Yeah.
March or mid-March and figure out if we're going to have any more snow days before we set the numbers. So I
Sure.
think there may be something following, but there's not anything that's
Yeah.
on the fast track yet.
Okay.
Yeah, my recollection too, I didn't think it was Whitmer that proposed that, but there was, I forget who it was, a gentleman that proposed this, but what always strikes me is they don't talk to their local school districts to see how that will affect the children's education, especially when you see this, that they want to raise the growth rate from 20, double it, actually. You know, I'm just like, you can't do both. You know what I mean? You just can't do both.
Yeah, having kids in school is really important.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it
having them with
is.
our teachers, that's kind of the cornerstone of how we reach student achievement. And my thought is you have to have 190 days, 195 days, and guess what? You have to have 195 days no matter whether you
Yeah,
have snow
what the
or
weather brings you.
rain or
Cyclones,
sleet.
yeah.
Kind of like the mailman.
Yeah.
We're going to deliver.
Yeah, they also got those days.
Actually, they
off, right?
didn't deliver.
State
No?
emergency
Well,
days.
unfortunately, they probably should have. But
There's one other thing that I'd like to add to that, if I may, just that the Education Committee is talking about eliminating ACT work keys as an assessment, but it's just in the Education Committee at this point. It's House Bill 4162.
Thank you. The Eaton Risa report was sent in by Jay Bennett. I'll read it to you. It says, Superintendent Cindy Anderson was found to be highly effective in her latest performance review. Her contract has been extended through June 30th, 2021. Local districts will receive the 2019-2020 Eaton Risa budget proposal to review by May 1st, 2019. Eaton Risa has entered a new 3-year service agreement for public relations and communications with Ingham ISD. And that's it. Grand Ledge Education Foundation.
We have not met as a whole group, but we do have a meeting scheduled for tomorrow to look over the financial areas. We're trying to get that straightened out from when Mr. Winstanley left the group to transfer that over. So working on that tomorrow.
Okay. And the superintendent's report.
several items this evening. First of all, Grand Ledge Archery hosted a 3D archery nationals qualifier and had more than 300 student participants from across the state. Wacusta took home a first-place trophy, Grand Ledge High School took home a second-place trophy, and Hayes took home a third-place trophy. All of the teams qualified for nationals. Next, Delta Center teacher Erica Rothwell was the Chick-fil-A Teacher of the Month. Part of the honor was to have a Chick-fil-A cow visit her classroom. The kids loved it, and that's no bull.
Oh,
nice.
you should steer away from that
Don't
kind
bull.
Our-
farm girl.
Wow.
I will
Two
adjourn this
two
meeting.
moans in the same one. Wow. In addition to Erica, our Delta Center music teacher Denise Wilkinson was awarded the Michigan Education Association's Award of Merit for exemplary service to music education at the Michigan Music Conference. Kudos to Ms. Wilkinson. Hayes teacher Sarah Felsing received a 2000 grant through Touchstone Energy Classroom Technology for compound microscopes. And finally, some of our high school students recently participated in the National History Day competition and have now advanced to the states. National History Day is a competition that allows students to explore various history topics under a specific theme. This year's theme is Tragedy and Triumph. 6 students made up 4 teams who worked for months on projects covering Women's March of Versailles, Alexander the Great, the Salem Witch Trials, criminalization of women, and the Treaty of Versailles. That would conclude my report.
Thank you. Stole a little of my thunder. I wrote all that archery stuff down. I was gonna, fine, you got me. Okay, now we come to public comment on non-agenda items. Hey,
Jill, miss me? Yes.
Birthday girl, happy
Huh.
birthday.
Thanks. It's been a long basketball season, so I'm sorry I haven't been here.
All
I know I missed January as School Board Appreciation Month, and I wanted to personally just thank you. I know that you guys put a lot of time and effort into Grand Ledge students, and for that, I am thankful. I'm going to ask for 5 minutes because I'm going to speak on behalf of GLEA, and I haven't timed myself, so here's
We
hoping.
have. Don't worry about it.
We wanted to take a minute to address the board on a few items, the first being
It being the one that we received, the updated one that's in front of us.
correct.
I'll second that.
This is a roll call vote.
I think we've got a couple of gentlemen here to do some presentations. If
Great.
we can jump in before we
Yes,
do that. We've
Please.
got Craig Kaler's here with Hilltop Securities, who was instrumental in getting the bond sold down in Dallas. And we also have the board's attorney, Chris Imoreno, is here, and I think he'll do some presentation as well, but both of them will be available to ask questions.
Absolutely.
Greg?
So first off, thank you to the Board of Education, Dr. Metcalf, Ms. Rosinski, for all your help, for allowing us to serve the district. Without those two, this wouldn't have happened. They put a lot of effort in it just to get us ready to take your bonds to market. If I left a packet in front of you, and if I could direct you, please, to page 4 of that packet. We'll just start there, and I won't take too long. I want to bring a few points to your attention, however. This is just a nice, succinct overview of the transaction. We did price your bonds last Wednesday, and very happy to report that we had an outstanding result and a great response from the marketplace. In particular, on this page, I do want to point out that the rating for the school district itself was an A1 from Moody's. You also had a double A1 because your bonds are qualified for the school bond qualification and loan program, so you had the state of Michigan's credit rating applied to that transaction as well. The other item I wanted to point out on this as well is you're scheduled to close on the transaction on March 20th. So that's when all the funds will be wired and deposited into the school district's account, and that's when the fun begins. Page 7, please. I'll walk you just through a few of these pages and give you some highlights of the actual results of the financing. Under sources, you will see total sources of just over $60.1 million. Christopher will talk later about your maximum authorization, but your maximum authorization was $60 million. Our goal was to get your net proceeds as close as possible to that $60 million. The bonds that we actually sold, however, were only $52,145,000. That is because the market is heavily favoring premium bonds right now, meaning issuers are willing to pay more than face value for your bonds. So that's good news for you in a couple of respects. First off, you have fewer bonds that will be outstanding. Secondly, you're paying interest on fewer bonds. And so if you go down to the bottom of that column there and you see it, the second from last statistic, the true interest cost, you'll see that's at 3.83%. So for the assumptions you used when you took your qualification application to the state of Michigan, the assumption was 4.35%. So the good news out of this, right away, you're about 50 basis points or 0.5% lower than what you were telling the voters in the community. Typically, I would like to give you a firm number to compare the two. But because we had some fluidity here with bringing some of the Proposal 2 balances into this first series of bonds, it was very difficult for PFM to give us a one-to-one comparative analysis from what they took to the Treasury originally. But suffice it to say here, you're starting out with very good news for your community. Smaller par amount, lower interest rate. So that's good news to start with.
So could I just to say it to myself to make sure I understand it. So the interest rate you were saying was more like 4.3 was the projected one that we were using for what we told the voters.
Yes.
Okay. So if you had a face value bond of $1,000, somebody with a interest rate of 4.3 on it, and somebody said that school district has full faith and credit of the state of Michigan, or it's a AA rated, AA1. Therefore, I'm willing to pay $200 for this bond, which means it's effectively a lower interest rate for us because they paid a premium for the bond over the face value of the bond, causing the interest rate to be less, right? Is that?
That's correct.
Okay.
And
I just wanted to.
Yeah. It's a combination of factors. The state's
Right.
credit rating and the state's backing provides investors considerable confidence in your issue. Because if, for any reason, Grand Ledge was unable to pay a principal or interest payment, the state of Michigan would step in and make that payment. No.
So we didn't have to issue as many bonds because people paid a premium for the bonds over the face value of the bonds?
Yes.
Okay.
Very, very correct. But in the end, we're going to get you just under that $60 million of proceeds. That's the upside of that as well.
Yeah.
You're going to fully fund your construction project as expected. Let's go to page 8 briefly. And on page 8, you'll see the breakdown of orders and allotments by maturities. And this is where we really enjoyed the pricing last Wednesday. Our goal is to get as much interest in your bond issue as possible when we're pricing your bonds. And I'll make one note. The orders and allotments columns, those totals are off, so I want to correct those when I get down there. But you can see we had $52,145,000 of bonds. At the end, we had orders, not $64 million, but $170,410,000. So we were about 3.25 times oversubscribed on the entire offering. So that's great news for you. And at the end, we allotted bonds of $51,750,000. So you'll see in that rightmost column there where it says inventory bonds underwritten, we did have to take a few bonds on the short end into inventory. We just didn't get order flow on those bonds. But I can tell you by Thursday morning when I got in my office and pulled up the screen, those bonds were already sold. So everything's done. Your rates were locked in on Wednesday. So we had a very good response from the market. The next page gives you a little picture of that order flow. And you can see on the left side, you can see some of the names of firms that were ordering your bonds. We had 22 accounts participate through ordering bonds. That was on the day of pricing. We had 2 more accounts come in the day after pricing. And then on here, you'll see there's just over 70 orders for your bonds, 70 individual orders for the bonds, but in the end, we had closer to 80. So very good response, and it just gives you an idea. We've got household names here like State Farm, which we were very happy to see State Farm participate. They're very selective about what kind of issuer they're going to participate with. So to have them come in in a rather significant way, as you can see at the top, ordering almost $33 million of bonds. That's a great result for you, and that is a credit to the good work you've done managing your finances. A1 is a good credit rating, and they will not really participate below that credit rating. One other item I wanted to bring to your attention is on page 10. And just to show a little bit of what we were able to do through the pricing period, you look on there, you'll see February 19th, day before pricing. These bonds are priced on a spread to the index, which is the MMD. And if you see, we had 5 basis points, 8, 13, and so on. The next morning, we went out with the same spreads to the index. But because of the good order flow, by the end of the order period, we were able to reduce the spreads from 2026 down to 2044, with one exception in there for the 2033s. What does that mean? That means we were able to reduce your interest cost further from what we originally anticipated, and that's a result of the good order flow that we had in all of those maturities. So that's the advantage you have with the negotiated sale. You get the good order flow, you're able to leverage one investor against another and find that perfect little spot in the market on the day of pricing. So that worked very heavily in your favor as well. Are there any questions? Okay, great. Well, thank you again. I do appreciate the opportunity, and Christopher's going to walk you through the legal side.
Thank you, Craig. Good evening. Christopher Iammarino with Troon Law Firm. Pleasure to be here this evening. What I'd like to do is kind of walk you through the resolution that we have the motion and second on the floor for, so that if you have questions as I'm going through it, I invite you to go ahead and ask away. With respect to the resolution, the whereas paragraphs basically describe how we got to where we are today. It does identify that back on December 10, this board approved an authorizing resolution that contained in it certain parameters, and if those parameters were met, gave the superintendent the authority to accept pricing on the sale of your bonds. It also identified that Hilltop, Craig's firm, was to be your underwriter, and paragraph 3 identifies that, in fact, the parameters were met with the pricing that Hilltop presented, and so the superintendent did execute a bond purchase agreement. Paragraph 1 of the now therefore section of the resolution really gives a lot of detail as to how the funds are distributed, not only within the bond issue as a whole, but also splitting out the portion that is being attributed to Proposal 1 and the other portion, Proposal 2, because as you all recall, you had 2 proposals that passed by your voters. And so there needs to be a proper allocation between those 2 because you have differing purposes between the 2. And so while they're being issued in the same bond issue, they will need to be tracked and spent basically separately, siloed from one another. And so that's what paragraph 1 does. It identifies the number that Craig had identified, just under 60 million, at $59,997,243.95. So it was very close to that $60 million target. And it goes on and it breaks those amounts out. What is left remaining after these bonds will be issued, you'll have $80,221,973.81 available to issue with respect to Proposal 1, and Proposal 2 will have $7,905,782.24 left for the Proposal 2. So it's just something helpful for you all to keep in mind which pots are being used and exhausted by this first series of bonds. If we flip to page 2, we describe the structure of the bonds. As Mr. Kaler identified, these bonds are going to close, fund on March 20. That's the day that you'll receive the funds for purposes of undertaking your projects. It identifies the maturities in that paragraph and cross-references an Exhibit A, which is the final page of the resolution that provides you the debt service schedule for the bonds. Paragraph 3 identifies that these bonds are going to be callable prior to maturity. What that means is, with a 10-year call feature, first 10 years are not callable, but thereafter you have the opportunity of calling or paying off early the bonds remaining in the bond issue. The reason that's advantageous is that depending on what market conditions are at that point in time, you may find that you can issue new bonds at a cheaper rate than what these bonds are at, and therefore drive down the costs even further for your taxpayers. It's an option, it's not a requirement. Paragraph 4 identifies that there are 2 term bonds in this issue. Term bonds are the grouping or the pairing of multiple maturities together, usually done for large purchasers of bonds. They want to buy a large block of bonds, and so maturities are grouped. Paragraph 5 identifies the procedures. So if you are going to redeem bonds early or call bonds early, paragraph 5 identifies what the procedures are for that early call. Flipping the page to the 3rd page, paragraph 6 identifies blank bonds are being executed. Those are intended to facilitate secondary market transactions, the buying or selling of your bonds on the secondary market. Paragraph 7 identifies that the bonds will be registered and transferable as provided in the bond resolution, and the denomination related to those. Now, if any bondholder's bonds become lost, destroyed, stolen, paragraph 7 also provides the mechanism by which the bondholder can get their bonds replaced. Paragraph 8 divides out, we were at the time your December resolution was approved, it was unclear whether we were going to do a piece of Prop 2 or not. With that clarification now, we've split your capital projects fund into 2 pieces. And then paragraph 9 identifies how those 2 funds are going to be funded. Paragraph A identifies the amount that's going to be used for purposes of cost of issuance. And then paragraph 9B, if you flip the page, identifies what's going into your particular capital projects accounts. And so that $59,790,000 and change gets broken into 2 different pieces, $38 million and change and $21 million and change for the 2 different proposals. Paragraph 10 authorizes and ratifies the issuance of what was called the preliminary official statement. It's a bond prospectus, gives a great deal of financial and economic information about your district specifically and the community at large. Tip of the hat to the superintendent and the business office. A lot of hard work went into getting this document together, and it was vital to undertake the pricing that Mr. Kaler was just speaking of. So very important document, and we appreciate all the effort that went into that. This will then get finalized, and under paragraph 11, a final official statement will be prepared with all of the pricing information relative to the pricing that took place Wednesday and the bond purchase agreement that executed on Thursday. Then we have the paragraph 12 identifies that Huntington National Bank is going to be your paying agent. Paying agent's responsibility is to take the tax monies that are collected and to get them into the hands of the bondholders.
Can I just ask,
Sure.
I'm not terribly sophisticated in the world of bonds, but I was curious why we are using Huntington as the agent.
If I recall correctly, there was a bidding that
Is that what it was? Was that the, I remember discussion, but I didn't remember Huntington.
We have used Huntington on, we used them on the 2007 bond. And it's just, when you have financial, an agent or whatever who can help you, and they do a very, very good job with it, it's nice to kind of keep everything in the same, with the same company, rather than to have, you know, go with Bank of New York or US Bank and then Huntington. And I really,
Right, I'm
really
good with that.
I think it's
job
Ellen.
Huntington has
Okay.
done, and that's why we selected them for these
Right.
bonds also.
Yeah, I didn't remember that part. I guess what I was recalling was a different pool that we were talking about for something, but a meeting or two ago. But I don't really have, I don't have any issue with it. I was just curious on what basis we chose out of all the possible ones that it was Huntington. That's, I have no objection at all to it, just was curious.
And Huntington does, if I were to spitball the number, I would guess that Huntington is probably paying agent for about 80 to 85% of the school bond issues that are issued here in the state of Michigan.
Okay.
They have a strong reputation and a strong reliability factor as well.
Okay.
So, so that is essentially the resolution that we would ask the board to consider this evening. And I would ask, if possible, when the vote is called, if a roll call vote could be called on that. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them now, or if during your deliberation you have a question for me, that's why I'm here. Very good. Thank you all very much.
I don't know why we would argue. It's the biggest bond our district has ever passed, and we're so excited to be able to initiate all these projects. And
Oh, it is so exciting.
It is.
Absolutely. So, and this is that next step for all of that. So.
Yeah.
It'd be wonderful. By the way, I appreciate the page 12 and the next couple of pages, Craig, of the comparables, because they're all school districts that I would like to beat in lots of different ways, and it appears that in almost every category, we got a better yield than they did, as in lower than they did.
I'll give you a quick anecdotal on that. The next day, I was talking to one of our traders on the desk, and they said, well, we wanted Vanguard to get in and participate on the issue. And the guy said, I won't. And he said, well, why not? He says, well, I bought Utica bonds yesterday, and I'm getting more yield on their bonds than I get on the Grand Ledge bonds. So
That was one of the first ones I checked, was Utica. We also beat out Grosse Pointe, and I think Vestaburg, we beat them in some categories. Vestaburg's little, but anyway, seeing Utica and some of the big schools who have very good ratings, a lot of them. Anyway, the chart probably tells me more about how well we did than some of the other stuff that's hard for me to understand.
appreciate your recognition.
Thank you.
Look at that, Mona Shore.
Okay, is there any more discussion before we take our vote?
Mrs. Mulvena,
Yes.
Ms. Clark Pearson,
Yes.
Mr. Duena,
Yes.
Mrs. DeFort,
Yes.
President McKinnon,
Yes.
Mr. Smith,
Yes.
Mr. Shiflett.
Yes.
Okay. That is exciting. All right. On to new business, looking at the approval of a vehicle purchase. I will entertain a motion if we have one.
I move the Grand Ledge Public Schools Board of Education approve the purchase of a box truck from Todd Wenzel Chevrolet using general fund dollars not to exceed $56,076 as presented.
Support.
Thank you.
Okay. Any more discussion?
Just note, having recently purchased a new-to-me vehicle, these were not the options and equipment I was looking at purchasing online.
You
The
didn't
box
get-
truck
you
with a fancy lift on the back just doesn't.
You didn't get a
fit my-
Tommy Gate?
Yeah, it doesn't fit the use case scenarios that my wife and I have.
Doubling the size, or the price of the car?
Pretty much, yeah.
I kind of wanted to know how the old one was, because this is not
Yeah.
a truck that you use all the time, is it?
Sometimes a week, it's a delivery type, has that lift on the backside of the truck. And like anything else in Michigan, that too, you rusty. They repeatedly repeated it. And they got to the point where they have a hard time welding in there, and it became a real safety issue.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
and because of the rusty part of the box, it wasn't just like you could put a new lift on it.
So that goes for parts, or,
Oh, they'll sell the truck.
okay,
Yeah, I mean, they both put on an auction, 20-something hours.
great.
There's an auction, they sell buses and everything, everything imaginable. You know, there's a lot of it.
So the old truck will get okay. But you don't know how old it was?
I think it was a 2007.
Okay.
And there's 13 of those buses.
Oh.
That was an expensive year.
Let's not talk about that.
Not a good fleet issue, is it?
Pardon?
Not a good fleet issue to have.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, the same. Motion passes. Now we have public comment on agenda items. Come on up.
I just wanted to come back to the Capital Connections report and the legislation. I did hear a third piece of legislation that you guys didn't discuss, and that was, as you guys know, there's an hours section and a days section for what schools have to follow when making their calendars. And right now, we have to follow both. So there was a piece of legislation put out that had suggested that schools could follow one or the other. And it sounded like that legislation was something they wanted to approve, like, permanently, not just as a solution to this problem. I don't know about you guys, but I know that when I add 5 minutes onto my class period, I'm usually not getting a whole lot more instruction out in that time period. So it wasn't one of the ones I supported. But the other pieces of legislation, I was in support of simply on the fact that when we start adding days on to the end of the school year, we start looking at potential of not making the grade when it comes to that 75% attendance, as far as people's on vacation and people traveling, not just students, but teachers as well, and trying to make that 75% attendance cut, and then what happens if we don't make that? Do we lose funding for those days?
Yep.
So that would be my reason to support the one-time only 5-day whatever it is. Hopefully that can pass. Because
Duly noted.
Yeah.
Make sure Governor Whitmer
I'll call her.
hears it.
Send her a text.
Okay. Comments from staff and board.
I just want to say congratulations. First bond issue of this, you did a great job explaining it. And this was a really nice piece, like Sarah said, to compare how well we compare to other districts similar to ours. But yeah, very excited.
I'd like to echo that and, congratulate the administration on really keeping our finances in order over the last several years that have really allowed this moment to happen. I think it's earned the trust of the people, which allowed the voting. Then it'll also allowed us to get a much better credit rating, which will keep taxes low. Everybody knows where I stand on taxes. So I think it's a solid investment for us as a community. I'm really excited.
Yeah, I am too, and that, I have had clients who had bond sales, and they didn't get the bond, cost of the bonds was so high, they didn't hit the mark, and here we did with easily, and that, when I actually had some concern because the interest rates were starting to show a little bit of a rise there, and I thought, shoot, if
Beat
we had
'em
just
down.
hit this, we were used to a couple of years of almost interest-free environment, and I just kind of was fearful of what would happen, but this is a really wonderful result. It'll be an exciting couple of years. actually many years. It's going to take a
Yeah.
while. It'll take a while.
A lot of work.
I promise you, we will see these gentlemen back proposing a refunder in 10 years, right? That's, I mean, it's just, it's common, you have the luxury of waiting for that moment when the rates are perfect for that. So it's not like we have to do it either in May or any particular date or not. Once they're eligible, then we can watch for rates to be desirable again and lower that debt if we want.
See, that's the difference. I'm at the age where I remember rates just going up and up and up. There was only in the last few years they've gone down. So
Yeah.
when you say that, I think, oh, I didn't think we'd go, but, I mean, these are historically low rates, so you're making me feel a little bit older than I wanted to feel tonight.
Or I'm overly optimistic.
It's like the last time, one of the first times we were here, when I was on the board, and a young man comes in from UBS, I think, and said something about negative amortization, of course, is just a concept. It never has happened. And I thought, oh, yep, yeah, actually, I've seen it happen.
Yeah.
But he was too young to have seen those wonderful days. But anyway.
We're all on the bond theme. These bonds were qualified by the state, so they're part of the school bond qualification and loan program, if necessary, right? So they have the state's backing. You heard mention that if there was ever a problem, the state would step in and loan the money needed for principal and interest. So this was all before I got here, but I'll throw the kudos out. Grand Ledge is not currently a borrower in that program. So their bonds were approved, and the millage is being levied, and it's anticipated they'll be able to pay without such a borrowing required. And we see a lot of school districts that are deep into that borrowing mode and are levying 13 mills, which is the state maximum, the constitutional maximum, and they still aren't projected to pay for many, many years. So there's trouble. There's, plenty of districts are having trouble that doesn't exist here. So I can't take credit for that, but it's a nice situation to be in. So thank you for that as I step in. So
Thanks for mentioning that, though. I think that's, I don't think the public really knows how conservative we are in the budgeting process. And as long as I've been on the board, it's always been like that. There's been worse days than this day, that, when you have to close buildings, that's a bad day. So, but I appreciate your mentioning, how well the district, and I'm saying the business office, the superintendent, everybody, all the administrators manage our resources.
I would like to echo that as well. Special thanks to Nancy and Brian for the work that you've done to make this happen. I can only imagine the boxes to check and the things to review and review and review. So I appreciate your hard work in that, and I am very excited about where this is going to take our district in the next 10, 15, 20 years. I also wanted to make sure that the board was aware that there's a Michigan Association of School Board sponsors a day at the Capitol for legislative involvement and to understand some of the issues. And they usually have several legislators speak at the conference. As I've gone the last several years, and it will be held on April 17th this year from 8:30 to 1. Then they normally offer or encourage anyone who attends to go visit their legislators with some of the points that they've raised. It's been very informative and educational for me, so I would encourage anyone else that's able to attend.
I'll go ahead and mention there's a couple things going around the district. Conferences are this week, and so that's always exciting to remind the parents to get out there and go have those important conversations. I want to give some kudos to Mr. Ellsworth. I've heard some great things about his High Five Fridays. And as it was shared with me, it reminded me of observing his class. I wasn't in his class, but I did get to observe him as a teacher, and it reminded me of watching him run current events or something like, it just was, looks like it's going to be a nice routine for the district. Yeah, again, I wanted to commend Brian and Nancy on a great job selling the bonds. Like, I got a call from Brian, and you know, I'm sure he has to feel like he's explaining it very layperson to me, and I said, that sounds great, you know, that we're able to sell. It wasn't an issue selling the bonds, which, you know, we never think about when we're trying to pass it in the election. So that's a great thing not to think about. Reminder, March is reading month. I've started to see some things in schools already where you have Battle of the Books and this and that going on, and that's really amazing. I'll challenge fellow board members and staff to get into schools if you can, be a guest reader, because we know kids being read to is probably one of the top two yes, thank you, indicators of educational success. So March is reading month. That's kind of seek out what you can do in one of the elementaries. And that's all for me. I guess that's me. Anybody else? All right.
No idea. I think you just close them, maybe?
Future topics. Board Bond Advisory meeting Monday, March 11th, 2019, 5:30 in the Sodden Room 107. Work session Monday, March 11th, 2019 at 6 p.m. in Sodden Administrative Conference Room, and the regular meeting back here Monday, March 25th, 2019 at 6 p.m. in the boardroom here. Anything else for the good of the whole? All right, we'll adjourn at 6:47.